So, do we have audio? Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Excellent! Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Schrader. Good evening, Paul, or good afternoon. I don't know what time it is where you are.
It's afternoon in New York.
Afternoon, New York. My name is Casper, and it's my pleasure to be the medium between you and the audience tonight. We have a few questions from people in the audience and also a few questions from fans online. I've tried to choose the most inspiring questions, but it's going to be a bit varied, a lot of different kinds of questions.
No problem.
First of all, how are you doing with the eye?
Well, it's been 3 weeks now. They say 4 to 6 weeks, so we're just waiting.
It's a waiting game.
Yeah.
Specifically, you asked for this interview to be conducted before Light Sleeper. And I just wondered, why exactly would you like to be before Light Sleeper tonight?
Well, I've found that in this later phase of my career, I've returned to a certain type of character, and I'm now editing a film which will be the third of a trilogy of the First Reformed, the Card Counter, and the new one is called Master Gardener. And essentially that same character that I first stumbled across in writing Taxi Driver, and I returned to him in various ways. The most pure way until now was Light Sleeper, where it was the same template that I'm using now, so that I thought Light Sleeper would be an example of probably the most signature kinds of thing I've done. You know, I think that to the extent that people will remember my work, or to the extent they will remember anybody's work, that character of the taxi driver and the drug dealer and the minister and the card counter and the gardener, and to lesser degrees the gigolo and the society walker, I think that's what I've managed to do. That is my own and relatively unique to me.
So the film is kind of present for you right now.
Yeah, it's an example of the most unique, an example of what I do, what I can do. Some of the techniques in A Light Sleeper, I first tried in that film, and I've honed them ever since. So, yes, that's why.
Like I said, we have a lot of questions from people, and some of them are here tonight. Sebastian Lawrence Hoyland, were you here? Up there in the back. You have the question out of the gate here. Out of all the pictures you wrote but did not direct, which came closest to what you envisioned?
I wrote but not directed.
Yes.
Well, obviously Taxi Driver. I mean, I got very lucky right out of the box. If I had made that film, it would not have been anywhere as good a film, or as turned out to be long-lasting a film. And so it was a fortunate moment in time for both myself and Scorsese and De Niro to stumble upon this character as he was being born in the cinema. He had previously existed, but primarily in literature, and primarily in European literature. And this was his debut in the cinema.
I also have a question from, I think it was August Byberg Willensten, who's also present tonight. Some fantastic actors like Ken Otaga and Ethan Hawke and Nick Cage and Robert De Niro have played the leads in your films. Which actor's performance came the closest to how you imagined the character they played?
You know, Anthony Perkins once told me that acting is 75% casting. And then Elia Kazan wrote in his book that no, it's 90% casting. So, so much of acting is getting the right person, the right point in their life, the right challenge. And so when that happens, when you catch Nick Nolte, you know, just alive, full of that performance, that's not really directing or acting, that's casting, catching the person. But some of the characters I do, I have to, I don't like the demonstrations of feeling, you know, the telegraphing of feelings. So the characters tend to be withheld and withdrawn. And so that, and I just did this film with Joel Edgerton, and Joel looked at card counter and said, you know, he said, Oscar's really good on the quiet side. And the same thing I was at an award dinner for Ethan Hawke. I was sitting next to Richard Gere. And Gere turned to me and said, how can he do so little? So, you know, it's convincing an actor that the situation is doing a lot of the work for them. And I often find myself talking to an actor and saying, you know, you are not a tree being tossed about in a storm. You are a cliff, you are a rocky promontory, and you are being battered by the waves. And all you have to do is exist. The waves will come and go, and they'll be called day players, and they'll be called this, and they'll be called that. But in the end, you'll still be there, and just have faith in that fact.
It seems to work very well, that direction. Andrew Schumann asks the simple question, how do you view critique of your movies, having been a critic yourself?
Well, sometimes you learn things, and you learn, of course, fairly early on, you learn not to get too involved. I mean, people have a right to their opinions, and even if they're bad opinions or they're unthought out, you just have to let that go. Because I remember once years ago, I was at the Paramount lot, and Warren Beatty was showing his version of Reds that hadn't come out, and he asked me to see it. And I was in pre-production, and I was very tired, so I thought I would just sit way up the corner of the theater, and if I fell asleep, no one would notice. And what I didn't know was there was an intermission, so the lights came up, and I was asleep. And the next day on the lot, one of Warren's group came to me and said, Warren noticed that you were asleep, and he was disappointed. And I said to him at that time, I said, I know it took Warren 10 years to make this film, but it was 3 hours of my life. And 3 hours of my life means more to me than 10 years of his. And you have to remember that as a filmmaker. You're asking a person for 2 hours of their life.
Yes.
And that 2 hours of their life is very important to them. And they don't care all the suffering you went through to make the movie.
I'm sorry, I'll have to remember that. That's an excellent line. Felix Peterson asks, I've heard you talk about developing story by telling it to people you know, but how do you approach rewriting? Is it something you do a lot of?
Well, the stories I write tend to be chronological. So he wakes up in the morning, he gets gas, he makes a phone call, stuff like that. And those stories work very well in the oral tradition. You can just tell them like you're telling a story about, I went fishing with my uncle. It was a big storm and we didn't know. Then the storm blew over, stuff like that. So the oral tradition works very well for what kinds of stories I tell, but doesn't necessarily work. There's this movie out now that's getting a lot of attention, Everywhere, Everything, All at Once.
Right.
I mean, you simply cannot tell that story. That story defies an oral telling. It's a meta film, and I don't even know how you write it, to make any sense of it. So not all stories are born to be told, but most of them are. And it certainly is more a storyteller's medium than it is a writer's medium. Your words do not actually appear on screen. Your printed words, and so you have, if it works as a story, it will work on screen. And if you have a story that you can tell, let's say for 45 minutes, and keep somebody interested, then you have a movie. And that's one sure way to test the validity of what you're doing, because it's very easy to convince yourself that you're onto something when in fact you're not. And all it takes is sitting down with somebody and realizing that you're trying to tell them the story and they're not interested. And it's not their fault, it's the fault of the story.
It's kind of a follow-up, also from Felix. What does the ideas for your stories look like when you get them initially? What usually intrigues you about the new idea? Is it plot? Is it theme? Is it character? Is it style? What's the
different stories have different origins, but usually buried in it, there's going to be a metaphor. And so the first script I wrote, which was about young male urban loneliness, the metaphor was a taxi cab. It was a great metaphor, pure, absolutely pristine metaphor because people thought at that time of a taxi driver as this garrulous guy, everybody's, the best friend kind of guy. And I looked at him and I said, no, this is the dark hole, existential fear. This is a man, a boy in a yellow metal box trapped, floating around the sewers of the city. And so I had my metaphor. And so that if you have a problem and a metaphor, then the story ensues from that. In the case of Taxi Driver, the story is very, very simple. The girl he desires, he can't have. The girl he can have, he does not desire. He tries to kill the father figure of one and fails, kills the father figure of the other, and ironically becomes a hero. Now, that's the whole story. So it's all about character and, moving through that. And so that the new one, the one I'm editing right now, the metaphor is gardening. But the theme underneath is racism. Card counter, the metaphor was poker, but the theme underneath was torture. And the First Reformed, the metaphor was loss of faith, but the theme underneath was climate collapse. Yeah. And so that if your metaphor is sufficiently distanced from your theme, the sparks will start to move between the two. Now, if the theme and the metaphor are on top of each other, nothing's going to happen. And if they're too far apart, nothing's going to happen. So you just toy around with getting them close enough so the sparks jump from the metaphor to the theme and back and forth. And that's part of the fun of these kind of stories.
That's an excellent answer. We're slowly running out of time, but I have a few questions I really like to get in. Laura, I don't think you're in the shot. You have to get in the shot. There you go. This is Laura. Laura put together the whole retrospective we're doing here. I told Laura, she sent me about 60 questions, but I told her you can get one in.
Kubrickian t-shirt on.
Yeah, exactly. It's getting a lot of comments, but anyway, I asked her to give me one specific question. Which question do you want Paul to answer? And she said, you specifically asked us, Cinemateket, to include autofocus in the retrospective here. Why did you ask for specifically that film to be included?
Well, because it is sort of a comedy of types, and because it is so outrageously politically incorrect, I find that some people sort of want to look the other way, and I'm quite proud of it. And so I said, no. I mean, I think that because it's easier to fit the other stuff I've done into a simple box than that one. And so I always like to have that one shown just to show the variety of the stuff I do.
It kind of leads into the final question, which I totally randomly chose to be my own. No, because I got a few questions, or actually quite a lot of questions from people asking if you were interested in doing other genres. So that made me wonder whether you found yourself sort of locked in a certain groove when telling stories. Would you like to be able to tell other stories than the ones you do?
Well, it is true. I've always worked in the present era, well, with the exception of Mishima, which was biographical. So Mishima, Jake LaMotta, Bob Crane. But essentially, I tell them as if they're contemporary stories, even though they happened 10, 15 years ago. They're not really period pieces. I wouldn't quite know how to do, I'm never comfortable doing a period piece. So I like to do stories about this moment in time, and that are character driven, that have a theme and a metaphor. Yeah, I mean, I did do, of course, that was an adaptation. I did do Last Temptation of Christ.
And thank you for that, by the way.
And that was a period film, yes. And Scorsese and I are trying to revisit that territory with a TV series about the origins of Christianity. And we're still we're getting ready to go out with it and see if we can set it up.
Is it fiction?
No, the first year would go from the Pentecost to Masada.
Okay.
So from about 32 AD to 74.
Well, Paul, I don't know how to thank you enough for taking time to talk to us tonight. It's been a great pleasure. Please give Paul a large hand. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to see you make a lot more movies.
I noticed that you're unmasked. Are you
right?
Are you waiting for the mask to come back, or you think that?
Well, I think we've been quite lucky here. We've been unmasked for, this is a strange thing to say, but we've been unmasked for a couple of months now. And everything seems quite normal here, but the second you start listening to international news, you get a feeling that we're quite lucky.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was supposed to go to Italy in a month or so, and they just moved the event that I was going to because of just this problem.
Exactly. It's still a thing. Have you been like professionally handicapped by the whole COVID thing?
Well, on Card Counter, we shut down because of COVID, and we had to pick up 6 months later and finish. And then on the new one, Master Gardener, they have these COVID protocols. And, the cost of the COVID protocol in the production was around $500,000. And when you have a low budget film, that's a lot of money to spend on nurses and tests and safety devices. And when you talk about a big Hollywood film, sometimes they'll go up to $10-15 million on COVID protocols they cost. So it is, we're still making movies, but it is more expensive, and we really can't do yet the crowd scenes.
No.
And so in Card Counter, there was a scene where I had 500 extras. And I remember saying to the AD, because the virus was already in China, I remember saying to the AD, I bet you somebody here has it. And sure enough, somebody did. And 3 days later, we shut down.
Right.
The next day, they said no more than, we had 500 extras. The next day, they said no more than 50 extras. And then the next day, they said no more production.
Damn it. And I've been doing a lot of interviews with people or filmmakers who've been trying to produce things during the COVID. Some people, of course, it's been a hellish period, but for some, it gave them a pause to work on other things that actually made the final product better. It gave them, I think everyone have experienced suddenly having a break when you didn't actually plan to have it.
On the other hand, as Scorsese said to me, they can stop me from working for a year, but they can't stop my brain cells from dying for a year.
That's true. You better, you can always write. You can always write stuff. That's a good idea. No, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, people and filmmakers. I hope you enjoyed this interview and the questions. We tried to engage people in a certain way.
Well, thank you, Copenhagen.
Thank you, Paul Schrader.